Putin is learning a painful lesson. The harder he tries to suppress a revolution, the faster it spreads. The more Russians take to the streets, the more even the smallest forms of dissent get crushed. The security services, Federal Security Service, FSB above all, are now jailing teenagers for singing anti-war songs. They believe political terror will stop a revolt, but the plan is backfiring. The so-called Streisand effect is eating into the Kremlin's strategy. Thousands of teenagers all over Russia are now sharing and singing banned songs on social media in solidarity. Putin's real enemy is not Ukraine. It is the Russian people. This is not just paranoia. The crisis is very real. The FSB has opened a criminal case against exiled oligarchs plotting a coup. Putin is terrified that this visible youth revolt will give his enemies the momentum they need to remove him. Ironically, as with so much in this war, the revolt he's now fighting began because of him. His own overreach sparked it. In this sense, Putin's biggest enemy is Putin. It began with a teenage band in St. Petersburg that regularly performed anti-war songs in the middle of a town square. And when I say regularly, I mean they did it over months. The band had around 8,000 social media followers when they began. Then, in mid-October, one performance went viral across Russian social networks. They sang a song banned in Russia because it calls explicitly for regime change. On the same day as the viral clip, Putin's forces arrested the lead singer Diana Loganova, nicknamed Noah, just 18 years old, and two drummers. A court sentenced them to 13 days behind bars for noise pollution. But when their sentence ended, the police were waiting outside the prison. They were arrested again, this time charged with discrediting the army, a criminal offense that carries a prison sentence of up to 5 years. If anyone should be charged with discrediting the Russian army, it should be Putin himself, because he launched this war, forced the logistics, bled the treasury, conscripted the soldiers. But instead of accountability, he picks on kids who sing. He expected his swift crackdown to kill any inkling of revolt. Instead, the exact opposite happened. The band's popularity soared. Their following grew daily inside Russia and beyond. Teenagers across the country began spreading quotes from Noah's interviews, and one powerful quote struck me. "Art is the only language, at least in Russia, through which you can express what you think. I chose it, and I don't think I want to speak any other language." That line resonated. It revealed that these young men and women didn't expect riots. They expected art. They expected to sing, not to be arrested. They figured they might be fined, maybe detained. They did not expect jail time. Russia's protest laws already require any public gathering to have a permit from the state. As absurd as it sounds, you must ask the state for permission to protest the state. Of course, no one grants that permission, but in this case, Putin went beyond the permit violation. He prosecuted lyrics, he arrested performers for what they said, not just where they stood. The band had already done the illegal gathering. That was over. So the state escalated. Now the offense is singing. Even Russians who support the war think this is too much. That's why sympathy poured in, not just from urban intelligentsia, but from provinces, small towns, kids in schools. The case was covered by foreign media. One article noted, street concerts by Loganova and her band went viral after they began performing songs by artists labeled as foreign agents. This label allows the state to suppress critics, artists, and influencers almost at will. And it isn't just music. A Russian professor tweeted 2 lines of an old Russian scout song. "It's better to die fighting than live like a slave." And now he's been in jail for a year pending a verdict simply for posting an old lyric. From his courtroom, he said, "I perceive what's happening as a circus where the roles are played by evil clowns from horror movies. I am accused of trying to undermine the state with songs." He quoted the poet Pushkin. "Why do herds need the gifts of freedom? They must be slaughtered or sheared." He added that those prosecuting him acted not under duress but voluntarily to curry favor with their bosses. The logic of repression is now built into the system. These cultural crackdowns are signs of a deeper crisis. The war isn't just on Ukraine's borders, it's now inside Russia's economy, society, and state logic. Since early 2025, Ukraine has ramped up a long-range drone campaign targeting Russian energy infrastructure, refineries, pipelines, storage, export terminals. One Reuters analysis showed that the strikes knocked out around 17% of Russia's refining capacity by mid-August, and up to 21% by the end of that month. Another report pointed out that the campaign had cut over 1 million barrels per day of refining throughput and was shrinking Russia's fuel exports and domestic supplies. One strike on 24th October hit the CDU-4 crude distillation unit at the Ryazan refinery, Russia's 4th largest, forcing it to halt operations temporarily. Sources say that unit alone handled about 80,000 barrels per day. More broadly, industry insiders say the damage has siphoned large volumes from Russia's refining system, creating shortages of gasoline in some parts of the country and hurting export earnings. In September, traders and filling station operators reported shortages of popular gasoline grades AI-92, AI-95 in the Volga, southern, and far eastern regions. Private stations, which comprise around 40% of Russia's network by volume, were worst hit. They could not stockpile fuel because of high interest rates, around 17%, and reduced supplies. So consumers in some towns saw closed pumps or long lines. In Crimea, the shortages prompted rationing. Even the aviation sector is feeling the ripple. By November 4th, a sector executive warned that jet fuel risks were rising after months of disruption to gasoline and diesel supplies. In some regions, wholesale fuel prices have jumped 40 to 50% since the start of the year. For an economy already under strain, this is a stress test. The state has responded with controls, export bans on gasoline, temporary price caps, relaxed fuel specification rules, mixing kerosene with diesel for winter use. But these are patchwork repairs. The underlying logic remains. War spending is high, global sanctions intact, raising borrowing costs and shrinking investment. The central bank cut its key rate from 18% to 16.5% by late October, but borrowing remains expensive. Banks are reporting rising non-performing loans. Companies in the consumer goods and services sectors are seeing difficulty, while state firms and defense-linked industries remain shielded. Growth for 2025 is expected to undershoot the war-driven spike of 2022 to 24. Better than collapse, but worse than comfort. What does this mean for Russians? First, their immediate life. Fuel shortages will translate into higher transport costs, more expensive goods, more uncertainty in logistics and supply chains. A family might face a delayed delivery, higher commuting costs, or find their station closed for fuel. Borrowing costs remain high, so renovating or buying a car or house remains hard. Youth and creatives face the hardest squeeze. For them, digital life, music, art, even social posts entail risk. A teenager singing on the street, a professor reposting a lyric, a young designer uploading a meme, all are under a wider net of surveillance and legal jeopardy. Second, the state of mind. The crueler irony is that the Kremlin's crackdown has elevated the band and the message. What was a cliched protest song now has meaning. The arrests made the message viral. What was a local case now has national dimension. When a teenager in Yuknov sees the same charge applied to them as to the busker in St. Petersburg, the logic changes. You don't need to join the band to feel the pressure. Yet the meme also galvanizes. The imagery of repression breeds solidarity. Third, generational transition. The war economy model relied on older Soviet-era cadres, predictable routes, and control of narratives via legacy media. But an increasingly internet-literate youth, less invested in historic legitimacy, more exposed to global culture, bristles against isolation. When fuel runs out, apps get censored, and songs become crimes, the generation gap is cloaked in more than frustration. It is systemic mismatch. What does it mean for Putin? Strategically, authoritarian rule rests on three pillars: economic performance, elite cohesion, and narrative control. On economic performance, Russia is still afloat, but the float is pulling harder on the moorings. Exports of oil products, especially diesel, are falling. According to the Financial Times, Russia's diesel exports are heading toward lowest monthly totals since 2020. That reduces revenue for social programs, defense spending, and subsidies that keep restive regions quiet. On elite cohesion, the loyalty of the generals and oligarchs is intact for now, but as state subsidies climb, borrowing costs rise, and foreign earnings shrink, the margin for elite dissidents narrows. On narrative control, the Kremlin still dominates television, radio, and print, but what it cannot dominate is social media and lived experience. When people queue for petrol, see inflation bite, watch a teenager arrested for a song, they begin to question not just the plot, but the competence. Putin has options. One path is manage stability, tighten repression, restrict freedom, cushion elites, control energy flows, maintain the war economy, and grind time. Another path is a shock rally. Some dramatic military or external event creates a burst of patriotism, the state unlocks extra revenue, repression intensifies, and the system buys years of breathing space. The third path is slow fragmentation, not a collapse, but a gradual weakening. Regions drift, elites hedge, culture leaks, economy stagnates, and legitimacy erodes incrementally. History suggests this pattern is subtle but cumulative. For Russians, the future is a mix of constraint and choice. Constraint because the environment will remain tightly controlled. Repression will expand, markets will squeeze, culture will carry risk. Choice because precisely in that environment, each act of creative defiance becomes symbolic. Each voice counts. The teenager singing a banned song is not naive. They're signaling the question, if not this, what? They matter not because they win, but because their stance changes the terms of concession. The state can arrest the singer, it cannot erase the recording, the hashtags, the solidarity. Ultimately, the regime depends on the ability to make life predictable. Jobs, fuel, rules, subsidies. When that predictability breaks, not in one crash, but in many micro-failures, the margin for error shrinks. You can run a dictatorship when the train arrives on time. You cannot run one when the passengers don't know which day the train will run at all. The script of repression is no longer sufficient. The song they tried to silence has become the narrative the state must contend with. And though the state may win the battle of courts, police, and laws, it cannot win the battle of the next generation's expectations. Because the next generation does not accept that singing a song should lead to jail. They expect life. They expect art. They expect the freedom to express. And when they don't get it, the system leaks. Not with a bang, but with a hum growing louder every day. In that sense, the greatest threat to Putin is not an armed coup or a foreign invasion. It's silent internal attrition. A system that spends its resources policing whispers rather than building futures. When the students stop singing because they're scared, that's victory for a dictatorship. But when they sing anyway, the system begins to feel the weight. So when we ask, what does the future hold for Russia? It is this: slower growth, tighter control, more visible missteps, and cultural resistance simmering beneath. And for Putin, he remains strong, but marching into a narrowing corridor. The walls may hold for now, but the roof above them is being chipped away, one banded lyric at a time. Thank you.